Jen, what do you think of when you think of Chicago?
I think of
Crickets.
yeah, that's what I think of. I don't know much about Chicago.
You know what? To be fair, I don't know that much about Chicago either. I know it's the home of the Blackhawks, but besides that, I don't really know too much else. I know they have like some trains there. I imagine they have like a cool accent. So for all our Chicago fans out there, love ya.
I know it's a very pretty city. Like it looks very nice.
Yeah, yeah. So imagine the heat is pouring down in Chicago. We're in the roaring times of the 1940s, specifically 1948, and you're walking past a house, and it looks quite odd. So you turn, and you see a woman, and she has her face shielded. She's trying not to look at the camera, which is taking a picture of her. But on her front steps, there are 4 children, and they look kind of confused. They don't really know what's going on. Like, oh, are we supposed to be delivering papers? Or why are we famous right now? I don't get it. But beside them, there's this big bulletin board. And it's not necessarily the fact that these children are sitting on the front step or that their mother is hiding their face of maybe shame. It's what's on the bulletin board that is so truly horrifying. And it really encapsulates this feeling of utter desperation, because on this bulletin board it reads 4 children for sale, inquire within. This is the tale of the Chalifoux family and their struggle against the extreme poverty. Hi, and welcome to the Decomposing Fire podcast. We're excited to have you here with us as we delve into some truly intriguing and occasionally some true crime cases. I'm your host, Kira, and with me is Jen. Everything we say in our podcast is information that we've gathered from testimonies, interviews, documents, and trustful sources. Any opinion we say is our own opinion. In today's case, it's a little bit hard to find information. There's a lot about the picture and what was happening at the time, but there's not really too many details about the actual people besides what I could gather from some netizens. So if we get any information wrong, feel free to let us know in the comments, or if you just want to add to the conversation, always welcome to down there. We mean no disrespect to anyone affected by this case. Today, we're going to be discussing the Chalifoux family. Before we get started, we're just going to be talking about some potential abuse of children. So if that doesn't feel good with you, please check out one of our other episodes. Take care of yourself, go on a long walk, touch some grass, get grounded, and we'll see you in the next episode. With that being said, we're going to get into it. So the Chalifoux family was led by Ray Chalifoux, who was a 40-year-old man. He had been stricken with being laid off from his job of being a coal truck driver. He also had a 24-year-old wife named Lucille, and they found themselves in an unimaginable position. They had 4 children, and they were just pregnant with their 5th child. With the mounting bills coming up, they had eviction notices from their apartment as they were unable to pay rent. They didn't have anything else to give, it seemed. So they put up an ad. 4 of our children are for sale. But how would something like this be okay? And why would they want to sell their children? Let's get into it. So in the picture, which is probably up on screen, you can see Lucille with her head turned away from the camera. So she was feeling probably what I imagine was shame. She didn't want to be pictured at the time. And you can see how the sign is rapidly written as it's just kind of painted on. There's not really anything else. Just come on in. We'll talk about the sale of my children if you want. But on the step, there are her 4 children. There's Lana, who is age 6, Ray, who is age 5, Milton, who is age 4, and Sue Ellen, who is 2. They had no idea what was going on. They didn't know why they were getting a picture taken of them. They were just sitting on their front step. It wouldn't be long before the photograph would appear in a huge circulation that caused wide circulation in August of 1948, as it was republished across newspapers worldwide, and became an unforgettable symbol of desperation. The public had an immediate reaction, which was a little strange. So there were people who had a lot of sympathy and they wanted to offer assistance to the Chalifoux family. And there was reports of a woman in Chicago who opened her home to these children, and they tried to make these job offers and financial support to this family. But amongst that, there was also an underside to this. So the public really wanted to help. They could see that they were struggling. But official welfare agencies, who likely read this as well, took no notice. And it really highlights just how, at the time, the child welfare system didn't have any extreme structures in place. I'll say that. There was also some rumors that this picture was staged, but horrifyingly, it's all true. All 4 of the children who are in the picture, including the 5th child who was still in Lucille's belly, would eventually be sold or relinquished after 2 years of this picture's appearance. The family unit crumbled, and Ray, the father, abandoned the family, who was reportedly just he gave an excuse that he wasn't able to return to the family due to his criminal record. I think he had a lot of abuse charges, assault charges, and he just was having a really hard time getting a job. But he just left the family. No notes, no nothing. Left alone, Lucille relied entirely on government assistance. But what eventually ended up happening for the children that weren't sold, they had to be removed due to Lucille's new relationship with her boyfriend, who didn't want anything to do with these children, leading her to give them away. This wasn't merely a sale, it was a cry for help. But what happened to the kids? So Lana, who was age 6 at the photo, there is not a lot of details surrounding what happened after her sale, as it wasn't known to her siblings after the many years that they were separated. But tragically, they were able to see that Lana died of cancer in 1998 before any of the siblings could reconnect. There was Ray Ann Mills, who was born as Ray Chalifoux, who was age 5. She was sold for $2, allegedly for her mother's bingo money because she was a gambler. And she was sold to a couple named John and Ruth Zoltman. Her name change was to Beverly once they had bought her. And her new home was truly a thing of horrors. There was a significant lack of affection and severe abuse. Rayanne was chained up all the time, and she was forced into labor as a field worker. She was treated just like property, a $2 human being. The trauma continued into her late teenage years when she was kidnapped, assaulted, essayed, and became pregnant. Her baby girl was taken from her and adopted. At the age of 17, Rayanne left her abusive home, and she said that she never looked back. Despite this hardship and the trauma of losing her child, Rayanne grew into a compassionate and loving mother in her later years. Her son went on to describe her as tough as nails, and it's just awful how she had to go from this life of pretty much exactly slavery to trying to find her own freedom. Milton was also taken in by the Zoltmans with Rayanne. This was because he was crying nearby. They were like, oh yeah, we'll take him too. So they changed his name to Kenneth David Zoltman. And this abuse for Rayanne wasn't solely to her. It was also to Milton. He was tied up and beaten on his first day, and he was expected to be a slave on their farm. It is really horrifying because the prominent abuse that he suffered eventually manifested into a violent rage in his teenage years and led him to being a menace to society by a judge. And he was given a choice between serving his sentence in a mental hospital or prison. And he opted for going to a mental hospital where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He eventually left the hospital in 1967. He married and moved to Arizona. Later, his marriage would end up dissolving, but he would remain in Tuscan. One of the last of the children, Sue Ellen, who was age 2, after the sale, she was raised really close to her original home in Chicago. She would eventually reunite with her siblings in 2013, where she was in the late stages of lung disease, which really hampered her ability to speak and tell her story. But despite this, she was able to describe her feelings on a piece of paper. She described being reunited with her sister Rayanne as fabulous, and she loved her sister so much. But this love didn't extend onto their birth mother, and I'll get into their birth mother in a second here. But she wrote on her paper, she needs to be in hell burning. Sue Ellen lived close to her original home, but despite that, her birth mother didn't want her at all. And this deep act of abandonment persisted throughout her entire life, as she had to witness her birth mother just not wanting her at all. And that was really, really hard for her, not only being sold, but being abandoned. And the final child, David, his name was David McDaniel. He was born in 1949. He was the one who was still, being created at the time. So for him, he was either removed from the home or relinquished in July of 1950. His condition was horrible when he was taken from the home. He was covered in bed bug bites and in severe neglect. He was raised in a very poor environment in his birth home, but he was legally adopted by Harry and Lulia McDaniel, who provided him with a safe and stable home. It was a little strict, but compared to his siblings, he thrived, kind of. He describes himself as a rebellious teenager, as he eventually ran away from home at the age of 16. At 20, he served in the military, and he had a career as a truck driver. Despite the differences from his adopted family, David only lived a few miles away from Rayanne and Milton, and he was able to visit them on several occasions, and he was able to witness their worsening situation. He was able to see them being tied up in the barn and being abused. He kind of reflected on his mother's actions, and I'll again get into this in a moment. He went on to say that his mother never apologized. Back then, it was all survival, and he says, we're all human beings. We all make mistakes. Who are we to judge? She could have been thinking about the children and not wanting them to die, or, there's a lot of reasons that she might have sold her children. But with that being said, Ray and Lucille, their journeys. So, right, we talked about Ray. He left home, whatever. Lucille was left alone after David was taken away. In a striking turn of events, she went on to remarry and had 4 more daughters, which she all kept and raised, despite giving away her children. When eventually her estranged children came back to her as adults, Lucille described completely lacking love for them and showed no regret of letting them go. It was really hard for the children to see that Lucille kept her later born children despite not wanting her first 5. But the Chalifoux case is just a shocking display of just how things were at the time. It wasn't necessarily an isolated anomaly. It was just something that was published. There was a visible manifestation of what was happening at the time. There was a lot of child selling. There was a lot of trafficking that existed in all sorts of forms in the 1940s. Children were often treated as commodities. They were sold or relinquished by their parents, legal guardians, or even sometimes adoption agencies. Prominently, there was a woman named Georgina Tan, who between 1924 and 1950 stole or sold approximately 5,000 children without looking into her as a person. So there were a lot of disturbing practices about Tan's activities who I would love to do a deep dive on one day, but it was kind of the first beginnings of adoption, but it still was not good at all. Children were subjected to indenture, which was a form of forced labor, and they were given very little education. There was something called the Orphan Training Project, which was involved with transporting children for resettlement by farmers who needed labor. And they were sold into this by kind of slave auction. So they'd be like, all right, we have child number 1 over here going for, all right, $5. He's all yours. Yeah. Additionally, baby farms were a thing where many children were murdered or sold up to $100. And this was more of an informal market of where children were sold by brokers or midwives, or even a father trading his daughter or unborn daughter sometimes for his debts, like poker. And it was really disturbing at the time. There were many attempts to pass a federal legislation to ban baby selling between 1955 and 1956, but these were unsuccessful. There wasn't a lot of legal framework or political will to even address the situation at a national level. So, all of that being said, despite being separated for decades and enduring some horrible and traumatic experiences, the surviving siblings, Rayanne, Milton, Sue Ellen, and David, started on their quest to reconnect and reconcile with each other. And they all kind of started in 2013 through Facebook, where they were able to find that Lana had tragically died of cancer. And they went on to talk about their birth mother and their various ways that they were brought up. And Sue Ellen had a piece of hatred for her mother with being so close to her. Milton expressed a deep sense of rejection, saying that his birth mother never loved him, didn't apologize for selling him, and she really didn't care. Whereas, David was able to be like, well, you know what, it's survival, it's whatever, we all make mistakes. But that's kind of where we're at in today's case. The story of the 4 children for sale is a profound, and so many layers go to this picture, and it's just shocking to see the poverty in post-war America and how publicly children were just sold. It's important to remember the lives of the Chalifoux children, Lana, Rayanne, Milton, Sue Ellen, and David, will never be able to undo their harrowing paths due to being sold and the child welfare that maybe wasn't in place at the time. That's where we're at in today's case. Feel free to add in the discussion down below, but thank you so much for listening, and we hope we explained this case with as much factual information as we could. Again, we mean no harm, and we're just starting a discussion, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye!